Okay. That's weird. Is Sandy still here?
I'm still here.
Oh, you're still here, but you're not showing. Hi, Penelope. Okay. So for some reason, YouTube doesn't show that Sandy's here, but
That's okay.
people can hear you.
Okay.
And so we already have 4 other people on YouTube, and we usually get up to 20 or so at any given time. So we will have some others. Penelope Ryder, who's on YouTube, if you can put 2 windows on your screen, you can bring up the YouTube thingy, which let me give you I'll give you the link for the YouTube session if you want. And you can also see the chat over on YouTube if you want to, because that's where we are being broadcast. But people on YouTube, oh, so Penelope says she can see Sandy, but I cannot. Oh, well. All right. Anyway, and here's Jerome. Welcome, Jerome. I don't know what we're doing wrong, because some people, like Jerome, comes on automatically, but other people I often have to let in, and I don't understand why. And
I don't know. I always sign on just with the number on Zoom. I bring up Zoom and just the number. I don't sign on with the link.
Oh, you don't sign on with the link?
Yeah, I've had trouble with the links before like that.
I see. Huh, interesting. Well, it's always a mystery to me. People, the logicians think that you can get all the mystery out of these things. But here we are in Calgary, Asheville, North Carolina, and Reno, and Annapolis, Maryland. And it all works somehow. And then Penelope's online from London. So where it is after 1 o'clock in the morning. So more power to you, Penelope. She says Mercury has gone into retrograde today. If you are an astrologer, you will know what that means. I don't know, but in any case, let's see. So why don't we? Rather than me start, because I don't want to dominate the evening, let us ask first, maybe Miles, if you have any comments on this chapter. So for everybody's knowledge, everybody on the playback, we are looking at chapter 6 of Memories, Dreams, Reflections, which is Dr. Carl Jung's, what passes as his autobiography. It's actually a autobiography of the development of his psyche. That's what he thought was important. So he didn't care about all the dates and the magic events of his life, but he did care about how his psyche developed, and so on. And so that's what Memories, Dreams, Reflections is about. And it's sort of a model for all of us to try to understand our own development, but our development is going to be different from his, and he's very explicit about that. But anyway, I've given you a minute and a half, Miles, to gather your thoughts. So do you have something to say?
Well, I will say one thing. I read Memories, Dreams, and Reflections early on, I think because when I first connected with you, you suggested that I start with that book. Mm-hmm. And I usually take a lot of notes, but I didn't actually take a lot of notes. And Can you just tell me what pages we're covering today? From what page number to what page?
Yeah, let's see. We're covering chapter 6, which is from page 170 to 200, basically.
Okay. So,
Okay,
did you say 270?
170.
What, 170?
170 to 200. This is Dr.
Okay.
Jung's Red Book period. It's his confrontation with the unconscious that we're getting into.
Yeah,
here.
I will yield the stage because I have some notes from page 252 and then 340. So this is a bit of a gap in my notes. So I will listen in. Thank you.
Okay. Feel free to pipe up, however. So let me ask Jerome. Jerome, do you have some thoughts about this?
Well, this it's a long chapter. It's
Yeah.
called Confrontation with the Unconscious.
Well, get us started, and then
well, it all relates to Jung became disoriented. If you read the chapters, and because of his break with Freud, and so he said he felt like the ground just went out from under him, you
Right.
know. And so he fell into this, I would think it was more of a depression or something, but that's just my
Yeah, I
view.
think that's a correct assessment of it.
Yeah. And then so he started questioning, he had this high egoic, if you want to call it, development. And he was very into his logos side and all of this stuff, you know.
Right,
And,
because he'd been in medical school and had to learn all the facts and just the facts, ma'am, just the facts.
just the facts, that's right. But
Right.
then, you know, he disagreed with Freud because Freud was just saying it's all libido and we, you know, we repress things that we don't want to deal with. But Jung found something else. He said that's not right because when he was talking with his patients, because he was the first one to talk to them rather than just, you know, do the standard thing.
Right.
He found out that their stories were pieces of psyche that were trying to come together.
Right.
And so,
and of course, he had the advantage of working in a mental hospital.
yeah.
So he was up to his armpits in it for about 8 years, 7-8 years. And so go ahead.
Yeah. And then so he went, you know, just to summarize what's happening. And he went into this, I guess he said he did it intentionally, but he decided that even though that he was going to explore the inner realm or world, he dropped down. And his first vision was of this blonde, a corpse with blonde hair and a wound in its head, followed by a black scarab, and the blood was pouring out. And he recognized this was a hero or a solar myth.
Mm-hmm.
And this was what he called the drama of his death and renewal. So
Right.
he felt like those fantasies were trying to take power over him.
Or say something to him anyway.
Yeah, or he was, you know, he didn't want to go down, I guess.
Right.
And he
right.
wanted his emotional state as to stay stable. So, you know, and then it's like, I don't know what you'd say. He said, well, I'm just going to talk back to him.
Right. He eventually decides to go into his unconscious, but Nancy has pointed out that before he did that, there were a series of dreams. Nancy, do you want to address those?
Well, one of the main dreams was the Emerald Table dream.
Right.
And in this particular dream, after he begins to think about it, is that it reminds him of an emerald table in an alchemical legend.
Right.
And the significance was that it was an unusual activation in the unconscious, really got his attention. And then,
Right. And it was a vision of something. Something was happening.
yes, he felt like the dead were present, but they were also alive. And then
Right.
in the long row of tombs dream, he sees this long row of tombs in, I don't know how to say this, Merovingian times.
Merovingian. Yeah. Merovingian times.
Merovingian.
Yeah.
That's the middle of the 5th century.
Right.
And so he's walking down this row of tombs, seeing different ages, different
Right. And
people.
there were stone carvings on the top of the tombs. The custom
Yes.
was to put a sculpture of the knight on the top of the tomb.
That's it. And so he starts at the 5th century and he gets to the 12th century, a 12th century crusader. And as he looks at the occupants of these graves, they move or come alive. And what he learned from that was that the unconscious contents are not dead, but belong to our living being.
Right. That if you pay attention to them, they will wake up.
That's it.
Yeah.
It
Well,
gives them, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I also think this is when he first realized that these ancient histories that we have are part of our physical self that is trying to keep us from getting out of trouble, okay, and trying to activate.
Mm-hmm.
And he felt that pressure was trying to pull him back into those times. And this is where he came to the conclusion that, yeah, it's kind of like if you see a snake, you're going to actually react to the snake.
Right.
And even if you've never seen a snake.
Yep.
Because it's ingrained in somewhere in your DNA or whatever. All this history is ingrained.
Yeah. Even
And
if it's not a snake.
Right. And
even
then
if it's a stick on the ground or
or it could be a shadow and you think it's a monster, and it's
Right.
not. You mistake that. And he felt all these things were pulling at him, trying to pull him back into that time. And yet he thought his consciousness was developed more ahead of that time. So this becomes kind of like, the way I see it, is just an interplay that he discovered that was going on.
Well, and it's his insight that his psyche was telling him for what his path was going to be. He would have to go back to those times before he could go forward. He had to understand what was going on.
Yeah, that's his concept of the original man. He had to get back to the original man first and then figure out what was going on. So he was very brilliant, by the way. So
yeah, no doubt. Okay.
Something I think is real important too is that he realized by making images, actually painting them, drawing them, or whatever, that could help him not be overcome by the powers of these images.
Right. And so as we're talking about the images, what I want to do is I have put on my desktop a series of images that are from the Red Book from this time. And I'm just going to, at first, just page through them. And these were, for example, Mandala images that he talks about early in the Red Book. And a mandala image, you can imagine if you ever have looked through a kaleidoscope, it's something like that. And it changes like that. In other words, he's done these on different days. And so you can see different aspects of himself being present. And so in a way, it's like looking at a kaleidoscope. But for example, in this one, besides looking at the center of his psyche, he feels there's, you know, something pushing up, a wave of some unknown quantity that is pushing up psychic energy into his safe place. And it gets even more insistent here. And here's another.
Yes, it's like the unconscious is, or the shadow is beginning to take over. It's kind of
Right. And here on number 85, he's put a fish in gold spots. And obviously, that's a Christian reference. And let's see. You know, I'm not really going to say what these mean because, you know, you need to, basically you need the book, right? And the book is the red book here, which is over my right shoulder. And so that's where you can find these images, and they're quite remarkable and full size. I mean, the book itself weighs about 10 pounds. It's non-trivial.
yeah. I think that particular series of images is covered almost in one section. Of
Yes,
the red
it
book.
is.
And
Yes,
I
it
can't remember which
Right.
one it is. But
Okay, but these are some additional mandalas, and here we're showing a mandala where he's trying to show the four psychological types, and he shows it by a cross, and something's going on in each of the type areas. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe Jerome, who's the expert on MBTI, can tell us which function is which one.
no, I don't. Let's see. It's hard to say because you've got the sensing and intuition functions are the first two.
Right.
Like if you look at something and say, "What is it?" and you either look at it from a sensation standpoint or
Right.
your
So
intuition.
that would be Christ. Here
Mhm.
is the sensing
Yeah.
one, and
Mhm.
intuition is seeing all the possibilities and being crushed by the mandala and that sort of thing.
Could be, and then the other after you look at something and say what is it, then you decide what it is by either using thinking function
Right.
or your feeling function.
Right. So the one with the cow is probably
Feeling.
the instinct
Yeah.
one, which would leave the thinking function. But this is quite a thinking function.
I can't tell what that is.
Yeah.
But the other thing is you also have to remember there's the bodily, you know, we have the body to look at too, our instinctual body aspect. So
right. Okay, then I love this one because
there's the dragon. Yeah.
Here's the dragon that represents chaos, right? And the chaos is swarming around the mandala of the self, and you're up above the city. So this is all a very complicated city underneath, but it's just an amazing painting that he did here. Incredible. And
when I look at this, I think of it as, you know, we really have to come to grips with there's also the dark side and the light side. And it's, to me, this is almost like a yin yang symbol of it, the way it swirls around. And we have to look at both sides.
Right. So the star is almost the light side that's trying to get through, and the dragon represents the dark chaos. It's not in a pure yin yang, but nonetheless. Okay, so let's go to this one. This is the one that appears on this book over my right shoulder, The Art of C.G. Jung, on the cover. And this is his tree looking up toward the self, I guess. And then this is a terrific one too, because he's got a mandala in the sky, and he's got the tree of life here, and he's got the dragon down on the bottom as instinct, whatever.
It's also in the shape of an egg.
And it's in the shape of an egg, right, which is significant in the Red Book. And then there's one more here that's particularly important, which is this is the mandala that he was painting at the time that he met Richard Wilhelm. And he had the feeling that there was something Chinese about it. And then Wilhelm shows up with a Chinese alchemical text. And that definitely got his attention. And then there's just one more I want to show you. This one, again, is a mandala, and all these people, if I understand correctly, all these people that are looking at this mandala are dead. And some of them are looking away from it, and some of them are looking toward it, and some of them are even enlightened by it. And these are actual people, apparently. I don't think I ever saw any place where somebody enumerated who these people were, but I'm told that these were actual people in his life. And this was the last painting, by the way, in the Red Book. So it's quite interesting in a number of ways. And, you know, here on one small piece of paper, he's got like 100 different likenesses, and it's pretty amazing. Anyway, okay. So let me just check. Okay, no one else here yet. Okay. So let's see if Grenade says, like dreaming being awake or being awake while dreaming. And Penelope says, I adore Jung's work. Grenade says, I believe I've seen what mandalas represent. It seems like a four-dimensional shape entity and changes, moves in impossible ways. Yes, it certainly can in your imagination. That's true. And Marco Greco asks, what book is it? We are currently talking about Memories, Dreams, Reflections by C.G. Jung. But we are talking also about the Red Book, because chapter 6 of this Memories, Dreams, Reflections is about Dr. Jung's reflective period between, especially between 1913 and 1928. And it was that period during which he created what's called the Red Book, which is this large volume behind me, but it's also, there's also a reader's edition that doesn't have any of the images in it. And so this is about $25 on Amazon. That's about $150 on Amazon. But if you're interested in the work of C.G. Jung, I urge you to get the big book. I really do.
You can also find them online nowadays just by typing in Google or something like Red Book Pictures.
Oh yeah, you can actually get the images.
Yeah. So if you want to see them.
Yeah, if you want to see the images. Okay. So another important event that occurs during this chapter is the killing of Siegfried. Now, Siegfried was a hero figure, and he represented will, and the will to power especially, and the logos. And Siegfried in German culture, so he was a hero to Dr. Jung. From his own culture, he was he was German Swiss, I guess is what we would say. In Switzerland, there are Italian Swiss, French Swiss, and German Swiss, and so they speak 3 languages in Switzerland. And so Dr. Jung's history was from German extraction, and so his cultural hero was Siegfried, and he had a tremendous chariot that he drove, and wonderful armor, shining armor, and chariot, and so on. And in his dream, Dr. Jung killed Siegfried, and so he was really kind of shocked by that. But then after he killed Siegfried, the rain came and he had a feeling of grace. And he realized from that that his life was going to be about the Eros, in other words, the opposite side of the psyche from the logos. Okay, keeping in mind that everything that's rational is the logos, including every physical thing that you can touch has been made by the logos, because everything has to be made 100%. So even something like this glass, that glass was designed by someone, and the process of manufacturing it was a very specific way, and that's all logos. But the thing of all the physical things in your room is that none of them are alive. and so if you want to get a life, then you have to look at the Eros side of life. And this is one of the fundamental issues with Dr. Jung.
Yeah, I think that's important, because that particular, I've had those dreams, and I've heard other people have those dreams, is it'll feel dry, like the logos side was dry and lifeless.
Right.
And then they'll have a dream of living waters coming in. And that's kind of a shift into what I would call the Eros side.
Right.
And there's a lot of implications in that dream if you think about it. So.
Right. So if you look at my interview with Paul Vanderklay is a Calvinist pastor in Sacramento, and he's been raised on traditional theology. And he was very persuaded by Jordan Peterson at one time. And what really got his attention was that Jordan Peterson was bringing people back into being interested in Christianity, which is a good thing, okay? No doubt about it. But Jordan Peterson often talks about things he learned from Jung, and so Paul had assumed that Jordan Peterson is a Jungian. And so in my interview with him, I said, no, Paul, Jordan Peterson is not a Jungian. He's a guy who wants to save, quote unquote, save the logos, meaning all rational things. But all rational things, everything that you can see in this picture, everything is a product of the logos. Had to be 100% to make anything, right? But none of it has life in it until you put life into it. And so now the 5 of us are alive, and the 10 or so people that are watching on YouTube are alive. 12 people watching on YouTube right at the moment. And so we're now taking these things that are otherwise dead and putting our lives into them. So when you see my passion here, then that's my Eros. So I had to say to Paul, no, Paul, Jordan Peterson is not a Jungian, because Jordan Peterson is the opposite side of the ledger. And I was able to read to him the first 2 paragraphs of the Red Book. So I'm going to just share this now, just to remind everyone that this goes back to 1913. So the very first 2 paragraphs of the Red Book, Dr. Jung says the following: If I speak in the spirit of this time, I must say, no one and nothing can justify what I must proclaim to you. Justification is superfluous to me, since I have no choice, but I must. I have learned that in addition to the spirit of this time, there is still another spirit at work, namely that which rules the depths of everything contemporary. The spirit of this time would like to hear of use and value, very logical things to want to talk about. But that other spirit forces me nevertheless to speak beyond justification, use, and meaning, filled with human pride and blinded by the presumptuous spirit of the times. So that would be Siegfried, right? I long sought to hold that other spirit away from me, but I did not consider that the spirit of the depths, from time immemorial and for all the future, possesses a greater power than the spirit of this time, who changes with the generations. The spirit of the depths has subjugated all pride and arrogance to the power of judgment. He took away my belief in science. He robbed me of the joy of explaining and ordering things, and he let devotion to the ideals of this time die out in me. He forced me down to the last and simplest things. The spirit of the depths took my understanding and all of my knowledge and placed them at the service of the inexplicable and the paradoxical. He robbed me of speech and writing for everything that was not in his service, namely the melting together of sense and nonsense, which produces the supreme meaning. Okay, I'm not going to read the supreme meaning here. Because I have read it before, but the point is right there, and I guess this was put in the Red Book in 1915. Right there, Dr. Jung is emphasizing right at the beginning that he's not about the logos. So he's not about rationality. He's not about the scientific method. One criticism of the scientific method is scientific method works because scientists get to pick what's on the table and what can be discussed, and they want to solve for X. But the problem is they keep all variables out of the question, and the fact is it's all variables. Our whole life is variables, and so psychology is a natural science, but it's not a natural science that you can resolve statistically like that. It just can't be. And so an example would be, let's suppose that you have a statistic that say 10% of men are effeminate, let's say. Well, actually all men are effeminate at some level and some depth, and the question is how much and what do you do with that, and what is its meaning to you as an individual, and so what can you do with a statistic that says all men are 10% of all men are effeminate if you have a person sitting in front of you? You have no idea whether that person fills that statistical model or not. No idea. And you have to find out to see how that interplays with the rest of their life. And the problem was at the time of Jung's work in the Bergholzli, nobody knew how these things fit together really, so they couldn't help people really. I mean, one of the saddest stories is this woman who ultimately died in the mental institution, and she had been in love with a young man who had married somebody else, and she just went off the deep end, and people saw her making these sewing motions, and it turned out that sewing motion was a reference to the cobbler that she had been in love with, but nobody got that in the 50 years that she was hole up in the Bergholz before she died. And, you know, if they had known that, they could have talked her through it, possibly, and let her recover. But they didn't. In those days, they didn't pay any attention to the patients. They just sedated them or did whatever they were going to do. But they didn't really try to understand their plight, I think. I'm going to shut up. Comments?
I'll just go with they identify the symptoms and try to tamp them down, and they don't identify the cause. And I think that that's what Jung was looking for, was
Right.
the cause is not what you may be thinking. And that we need to combine both of these methods. We need the logical side and the scientific side, as well as the other side, because they're all the same thing. And we need to figure out how to get those together,
Right.
to benefit society. So
how to get things to happen. And
right.
they come through our life. They you know, like when you're creating something, obviously you're putting your life into that creation, whether it's, you know, a highway or an iPhone or Notre Dame Cathedral or a statue in Notre Dame Cathedral. If you're creating those things, you're putting your life into them. But in the end, they're just things. They're ultimately they're logos, and so they only point to the passion of your life or the passion of Christ, whatever it is. They aren't it, right?
Yeah, I think your meaning is using your essence and enjoying and your passion, and finding that. And if you do that, it really doesn't matter what you produce. It's just your essence and passion, and your meaning is there. So
right. So I'm going to hijack the session for a minute because I want to go back to the Red Book. And because this chapter is all about the Red Book period, and all of you can, Nancy was kind enough to prepare an outline of the chapter, plus you have the chapter. And if you're on YouTube and you're a member of our Dropbox, you will be able to find both the chapter in the collected works subfolder, and you'll be able to find Nancy's outline ultimately. So I'm not going to repeat work that's already been done unless we need some filler at the end of this. But there are some pretty profound things that come up in the Red Book. And even though I've read it, I don't know, 5 times at least, I've been, in the last month, I've been reading Liber Secundus, which is the middle part of the Red Book. I had not read it into the YouTube channel until about a month ago. I started to read Liber Secundus, and I was reminded myself of some really beautiful remarks here that we all need to be aware of. So one of them is truth. Everybody who's sort of at odds or in a quandary, they want to know the truth. You know, where's the truth? Is the truth in Catholicism? Is the truth in Judaism? Is the truth in Buddhism? Is the truth in Jainism? Is the truth not in any religion at all? And that sort of question. And when I read what Dr. Jung said about truth here, which you can find it actually on page 351 of the Reader's Edition. He's in his active imagination, and he's communicating with an attendant who is talking to him. And he says this. I am utterly weak and incapable of salvation. I whisper, a strange voice speaks. There is no salvation here. Okay, that's in his deep unconscious. There is no salvation here. You must remain calm or you will disturb the others. It is night and the other people want to sleep. I see it's the attendant. The room is dimly lit by a weak lamp and sadness weighs on the room. I couldn't find the way. He says, you don't need to find a way now. He speaks the truth. The way, or whatever it might be on which people go, is our way, the right way. There are no paved ways in the future. We say that it is this way, and it is. We build roads by going on. Our life is the truth that we seek. Only my life is the truth above all. We create the truth by living it. And I really appreciated that. I mean, that's almost, I mean, that's, for me, it's an aha moment. It's like enlightenment in Buddhism, that we create the truth by living it. So we all are the way. We all have our own truth, and we create the truth. We find the way by living this truth. And he points out that there are hellish webs of words, only words, but what are words? And so, you know, I hate to keep harping on John Vervaeke, but he deserves it so much. Okay, so philosophers are rationalists. Okay, philosophers are people that are trying to make a rational way of living in life, right? So John Vervaeke, everybody's concerned with meaning. And so John Vervaeke decided he was going to do 50 lectures on the meaning crisis, and specifically on awakening from the meaning crisis. And so what he proceeded to do was go through chapter and verse all the philosophers over historical times in this 50 videos. Not entirely. I mean, I'll give him a 0.5% that he didn't do this entirely, at least in the last 25 videos. Because in the last 2 minutes of video 50, he didn't. But basically what he did, was define the word meaning. Okay, and so in other words, he gave a dictionary definition. Okay, and that is not the meaning of your life. You cannot look up the word meaning in a dictionary or in anybody's philosophy and have the meaning of your life. The meaning of your life comes from the other side, from the balance, from the Eros, from living your life, from your passion. That's where it comes from. It doesn't come from the meaning, from the dictionary. And so what kept coming to my mind as I was listening to all these videos is Paul Simon's song, Kodachrome, which begins with the words, "When I think of all the crap I learned in high school, it's a wonder I could think at all." And this is Dr. Jung's point here, that we learn a lot of stuff that actually it's of marginal use to you. I mean, my assessment of college was 4 years of figuring out what not to read. And then law school was figuring out how to use a law library. And business school was 15 courses in statistics by different names. And the things that I have really been useful to my life, I've learned outside of the classroom, not in those classes. Regardless of what they were. And I went to a lot of good classes in college.
Well, I think that's important, Skip, because Vervaeke said, and he said several times, that what's called autodidactic learning, which means self-learning. He uses these fancy words. And his word salads that he produces is what I call them. He says it's suboptimal and that he knows best. And that turned me off because self-learning and lifelong learning, you just mentioned you learn more away from school than you did in school from your subjects. And I mean, that's the way we figure out our passions and what we want to do. And he's saying that's suboptimal and you got to follow his Buddhist path, you know.
Yeah, his Buddhist path,
yeah,
I have no objection to.
Yeah, but I mean, he's saying, I know best and I'm going to form this and I'm going to vet everything that comes through. You know, I mean, that's just, I don't know where he gets that from, but that's just
Well, he
my
gets
opinion,
it from
you
being
know.
a professor who has to justify,
You got it.
you know, who has to justify giving 2 semesters of courses. I mean, he did 50 lectures, 51-hour lectures. So that's the equivalent of 3 semesters, roughly, of college teaching. And that, you know, that's really troublesome to me. And but then there was another part of this I wanted to read. Why don't you carry forth here for a moment while I try to find what it was I was going to read here, because there's, oh, I know, I think I know.
I think, Nancy, do you want to say something?
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking about the professor, and a lot of college professors give you the idea that if you only can think things through, you can make things the way you want them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, you know, just a portion of the truth. Thinking is important, but it's not like that can control your world. But they seem to give that impression.
Right. And
And there are some subjects, I think Grenada was talking about classical physics. To understand classical physics, you do need logical understanding. And so you can understand classical physics that way, but the other types of learning and so forth, you need something else besides that.
yeah, we all need structure. We need the basis of what things are built on. So as we're getting ready to go to Mars, we have a number of problems, and we can't get there just by getting it. We can't just intuit it and get to it. In order to get the answers to things like what happens to a human being exposed to cosmic rays for at least a year and a half going to Mars and back. And we don't know that without doing the experiment, and somebody has to go out and be the guinea pig. And you're going to come up with an answer that you think will protect these people, and you know, maybe it won't. I mean, it's like this coronavirus crisis right now. Nobody knows enough about this virus to know what's going to work to keep us safe from it. And, you know, what's amazing to me is to see how much people are freaking out. And I mean, the scientists are freaking out about it. When with the flu, we've already had 26 million Americans with the flu this year and 12,000 deaths already in the United States from the flu. And so now we've had almost 2,000 deaths from coronavirus. But, you know, is that worse than the flu? I don't know. I'm a layman. But, you know, we need people who are educated in the ways of controlling epidemics to weigh in and tell us what we need to do, and also to have some ideas about how to successfully stop this thing. And so far, there doesn't seem to be any evidence that anybody's really got an answer yet. Maybe they will get a vaccine. I don't know. But so there's a part of the Red Book which I have not yet read. I'm planning to read it in the next couple of days, which is called The Three Prophecies. But before I get into that, let me look at the chats and also ask if others of you have comments on coronavirus or whatever. So let's see. Let's see. Okay, so Nicholas says, I respect Jordan Peterson deeply, but when Gabor Mate felt rather acutely that Jordan Peterson was angry, I took note. Not that I fully understood, because I didn't feel JP angry so much as extremely passionate, which I could accept. Now, please understand, I agree with probably 95% of the things that Jordan Peterson ever said. And from my perspective, what I think the role that he has served is to provide a father figure for a lot of young men in the world who've been raised without fathers. And so when he says, you gotta carry a load, bucko, what he's saying is, man, you have to grow up and take responsibility. And, if you don't have a father to tell you that and kick you out the door, then you need somebody else to do it for you, or at least tell you that it needs to be done. So in that respect, I do respect Jordan Peterson very much. I think that, but otherwise, I think that he's very heavily on the logos, and he even has said at one point, I'm trying to save the logos, quote unquote, as if we would lose the logos, because we won't. Okay, we can't make anything without the logos. So
well, he's also helping the young men get established in terms of building a strong ego, because you need to develop that strong ego before you can go to the second half of life. And he saved a lot of those people. Now, I don't know what the thing was with gave or mate, but I mean, gave or mate is more of a claims to be more of an enlightened type of person, and he's off on, in terms of that type of thing. I know there's probably a conflict there. I don't know exactly what the riff was, but
well, I think the issue is basically balance. Okay, we need balance. We need to understand that the things that we create with logos, including our ego, are rigid, and they are a skeleton by which we live our lives. And so, this glass is a skeleton. In this glass, I put water, which is the juice of life, and I drink from it. And I do that in my life. And so I need the logos 100% to make this glass, but then I need life and the experience of life to tell me, to give me pure water, to tell me I should drink it, and then I have to drink it. If I don't drink it, then I'm going to get myself sick. And those are all functions of life, not the logos per se.
Miles had something on the chat. Miles, are you?
Yeah, I've put a couple of things in the chat. The most recent is a very interesting short clip where Jordan Peterson is speaking in an interview to someone, and he says he was sternly warned never to talk about Jung in academic circles.
In his
lest
academic circles, yeah.
lest he be shamed for it, because I don't know if it's like, perhaps it's still this way today.
Absolutely.
That the very few academics in psychology, departments of universities at most of the world think Jung is, I don't know what they think, but apparently it's career suicide to advocate for Jung.
Well, the university is shallow and one-sided, and so is Jordan Peterson, for that matter. That's
well, and I'll talk to another thing as well. First of all, just an observation I've had. I often, almost every night, I wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning, and I'm tossing and turning, and with thoughts in my mind. And I get up, I use the washroom, and then I go downstairs. And now what I'm doing, though, is I'm having a cup of hot tea, and most recently peppermint or spearmint tea. And then I go back and I fall asleep, and wow, do I ever have some crazy dreams. So I don't know if anybody else ever experiences that there might be some teas or such that really stimulate your dreaming. And
I have that happen with acetaminophen, with Tylenol.
Okay. So now, I often have these dreams where I'm at some precarious height. And I've also had a couple of dreams where I'm in our house, or something that is supposed to be our house. And in the last night in this dream, I go out the back door, and there's these very steep steps down to a lower level. But the house is right at the edge of this precarious cliff. Now, the other thing that I posted that maybe is connected to why I have these dreams is a short video about the 1996 Everest disaster.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to watch these mountain climbing disaster documentaries, and another one is aviation mishaps. So perhaps that's why I have these dreams.
These are favorites of my wife as well.
Is that right? Oh boy, we could get along really grandly.
Right.
So anyway, talking about climbing Mount Everest, and again, I will just speak in general terms, but my suspicion is that most of the people, not all of them, but I would say by far, the gender that most is involved in mountain climbing are men, a certain kind of men. And in this clip that I play or have posted, 1996 Everest disaster, it's very interesting because these fellows are climbing Everest, and it's just an ordeal, and you have to really know what you're doing. It's very logos, to climb Mount Everest. You've got to be fit, and you got to be thinking and on the ball.
But it's Eros too, because you have to know when to stop.
Have your equipment, sucrose, food. So anyway, get to the chase. There's a gentleman who, 1996, this blizzard blows in when they were up at the top. They left, when they set out, it looked great, but all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this wind picks up, and they're in a whiteout. And quite a few of them, like 6 or 9 people, I think, died in that one day. But there was one individual, he fell over, he's like very close to the top, and he falls over, and he's basically paralyzed. And other climbers, it's every man for themselves up there, right? In those conditions. And they figure he's dead because he's not moving. And he apparently is up there all night. And the presentation I posted is a Dr. Ken Kamler. He was down at the lower base running a little medic unit. He tells the story of this fellow up there, and apparently he's figuring he's dead or he's dying, but then the vision of his family and his daughter, his children comes to mind. And Dr. Candler describes how the brain can reorganize the energy flow in the brain.
Mhm.
And incredibly, the thought of his family being without him generated some power, physical power from the brain, creating a physical power where he actually gets up and stumbles down to the next camp.
Mhm.
And he's got terrible frostbite. He loses lots of digits and such. But anyway,
He
the
survived.
thought I'm getting to is these men and sometimes women, they're driven by some sort of a logos challenge, but then it's life.
Right.
And the truth of life that you just read, that in this case kicked in, and it was Eros, I would suggest, that got him off the mountain.
Yeah, and that's what this book is about, Trauma and the Soul by Donald Kalshid. And I'll highly recommend this book because it basically says that when you're having a traumatic experience like that, your soul is going to kick in and try to give you an answer. And that's a very good example, Miles, of what he says happens. You know, you have a vision of your kids and you say, holy cow, I want to get back to my kids. I better get myself moving.
Holy cow, what am I doing up here? Like,
Right.
what kind of thinking made me think this was a good idea?
Right.
You know? It's all well and good if you get off the mountain and you get back to your family, but I think all of a sudden your priorities and what is real truth. I was just wondering, would you mind reading page 351 of the Red Book Reader's Edition once more about that statement about we create the truth by living it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's basically the statement. We create the truth by living it. Our life is the truth that we seek. Only my life is the truth above all. We create the truth that we seek. And so the point is, there's nobody that has the ultimate truth of all mankind, always and everywhere. Each one of us has our own truth, which is based on our own experiences. It's based on our education and so on. And so if we live our truth, then we're going to probably live our best life, I suppose. What do you say to that?
And it'll be meaningful. It's our meaningfulness is what it is. Even the person climbing Everest, he probably derived great meaning from that.
Right.
And that's his goal. He gets satisfaction from it. And he's happy about it, you know?
Right. Okay, let me go back to
I'll just add another thing. Coincidentally, Paul Vanderklay posted a great video today. It's titled Rationality Rules, Guilty of Unwittingly Smuggling Jesus In, and Morality plus the Vaush Debate. And Paul, you know, in this interesting interview towards the end, he talks about how, you know, there is a need for people to think about love, and that at the end of it all, a lot of people will trade a life. This is quoting Paul Vanderklay, so I think he's coming around. People will trade a life of happiness for a life of meaning, you know, and people will sacrifice happiness for meaning. And
they do.
Happiness is from the word happenings, right? We
Mm-hmm.
can be happy when we have good happenings around us.
I mean, it's very often the case in disasters where people sacrifice themselves for, and that gives their life meaning. And, you know, I've talked about my roommate from the basic school who made a sacrifice for me that ultimately led to his death. And you know, we didn't know it at the time that he made that sacrifice, but I can connect the dots going back. And this decision that he made that was a sacrifice for me explicitly led to his death. Okay. And if he hadn't
Yes.
made that decision, it probably would have been me dead instead of him. And so the fact that I have that knowledge that gives his life meaning, and it also pushes me in my life all the time, constantly. I have to live up to his sacrifice, right? And so let me go back to the chats here a moment. Okay, so Montana says, it seems like the logos rationality has its seed in the Eros meaning and life. In Kantian terms, would it be right to say that the Eros is the a priori? Yes, probably. I guess that's true. Nicholas says you should see Richard Feynman talk about how all social sciences are not real sciences because of the lack of statistical resolution. I raised my eyebrow. Yeah, right. Because, you know, if the damn 15 courses in statistics by different names I took to get my MBA were true, then I wouldn't have lost my life savings in the crash of 2008. Okay, it's very simple. You know, it's not true. And after, you know, I'm on the executive advisory committee of the business school now, or I haven't been there in a while, but I got upset with them because after the crash, my professor, who I learned 2 of the 3 things I learned from business school from, said, oh, well, that was just a black swan. And I said, you guys never mentioned a black swan back when I was in my MBA program. What's that? Okay. And so, you know, the logos can get you just so far, and then you go off the edge with the rest of the lemmings, you know, that's the thing. So Nick, let's see. Let's see. There were a bunch of things that were removed here, so can't keep up with that. Let's see. Okay, I want to go on with this 3 prophecies. I'm actually going to read this whole segment in as part of my readings of the Red Book, but there's a couple of pages here that are really worth thinking about. And so this segment of the Red Book was from an active imagination, and it's kind of a hoot in a way, and it's from January 22nd, 1914, and so it's a month and 10 days after Dr. Jung has started the Red Book period. He doesn't know why he's so upset, and he's about to discover the collective unconscious and be aware of it. And so anyway, this is what happens on that day, January 22, 1914, about 6 months before the outbreak of World War I. 3 prophecies. Wondrous things came nearer. I called my soul and asked her to dive down into the floods whose distant roaring I could hear. This happened on 22 January of the year 1914, as recorded in my Black Book. And thus she plunged into the darkness like a shot. And from the depths she called out, will you accept what I bring? I will accept what you bring. I do not have the right to judge or reject. Soul. So listen, there is old armor and rusty gear of our fathers down here, murderous leather trappings hanging from them, worm-eaten lance shafts, twisted spearheads, broken arrows, rotten shields, skulls, the bones of man and horse, old cannons, catapults, crumbling firebrands, smashed assault gear, stone spearheads, stone clubs, sharp bones, chipped arrowhead teeth. Everything in the battles of yore have littered the earth with. Will you accept all this? I accept it. You know better, my soul. Soul. I find painted stones, carved bones with magical signs, talismanic sayings on hanks of leather and small plates of lead, dirty pouches filled with teeth, human hair and fingernails, timbers lashed together, black orbs, moldy animal skins, all the superstitions hatched by dark prehistory. Will you accept all this? I accept it all. How should I dismiss anything? Soul. But I find worse, fratricide, cowardly mortal blows, torture, child sacrifice, the annihilation of whole peoples, arson, betrayal, war, rebellion. Will you also accept this? Also this, if it must be, how can I judge? The soul. I find epidemics, natural catastrophes, sunken ships, razed cities, frightful feral savagery, famines, human meanness and fear, whole mountains of fear. Aye, so shall it be, since you give it. Soul. I find the treasures of all past cultures, magnificent images of gods, spacious temples, paintings, papyrus rolls, sheets of parchment with the characters of bygone languages, books full of lost wisdom, hymns and chants of ancient priests, stories told the ages through, thousands of generations. Aye, that is an entire world whose extent I cannot grasp. How can I accept it? Soul, but you wanted to accept everything. You do not know your limits. Can you not limit yourself? I must limit myself. Who could ever grasp such wealth? Soul, be content and cultivate your garden with modesty. I will. I see that it is not worthy conquering a larger piece of the immeasurable, but a smaller one instead. A well-tended small garden is better than an ill-tended large garden. Both gardens are equally small when faced with the immeasurable, but unequally cared for. Soul, take shears and prune your trees. From the flooding darkness, I'm on page 375, by the way, of the reader's edition of the Red Book. From the flooding darkness, the son of the earth had brought my soul. The son of the earth had brought my soul gave me ancient things that pointed to the future. She gave me three things: the misery of war, the darkness of magic, and the gift of religion. If you are clever, you will understand that these three things belong together. These three mean the unleashing of chaos and its power, just as they also mean the binding of chaos. War is obvious and everybody sees it. Magic is dark, no one sees it. Religion is still to come, but it will become evident. Did you think that the horrors of such atrocious warfare would come over us? Did you think that the magic existed? Did you think that about a new religion? I sat up for long nights and looked ahead at what was to come, and I shuddered. Do you believe me? I am not too concerned. What should I believe? What should I disbelieve? I saw and I shuddered. But my spirit could not grasp the monstrous and could not conceive the extent of what was to come. The force of my longing languished and powerless sank the harvesting hands. I felt the burden of the most terrible work of the times ahead. I saw where and how, but no word can grasp it, no will can conquer it. I could not do otherwise. I let it sink again into the depths. I cannot give it to you, and I can speak only of the way of what is to come. Little good will come to you from outside. What will come to you lies within yourself, but what lies there, I would like to avert my eyes, close my ears, and deny all my senses. I would like to be someone among you who knows nothing and who never saw anything. It is too much and too unexpected. But I saw it, and my memory will not leave me alone. Yet I curtail my longing, which would like to stretch out into the future, and I return to my small garden that presently blooms and whose extent I can measure. It shall be well tended. The future should be left to those of the future. I return to the small and the real, for this is the great way, the way of what is to come. I return to my simple reality, to my undeniable and most minuscule being. And I take a knife and hold court over everything that has grown without measure and goal. Forests have grown around me, winding plants have climbed up me, and I am completely covered by endless proliferation. The depths are inexhaustible. They give everything. Everything is as good as nothing. Keep a little and you have something. To recognize and know your ambition and your greed to gather. You're craving to cultivate it, grasp it, make it serviceable, influence it, master it, order it, to give interpretations and meanings is extravagant. It is lunacy like everything that transcends its boundaries. How can you hold that which you are not? Would you really like to force everything which you are not under the yoke of your wretched knowledge and understanding? Remember that you can know yourself and with that you know enough, but you cannot know others and everything else. Beware of knowing what lies beyond yourself, or else your presumed knowledge will suffocate the life of those who know themselves. A knower may know himself. That is his limit. Okay, I'll stop there. And the next chapter after that is called The Gift of Magic. So that will be 3 or 4 days from now when I'll read the entire, each of these entire chapters. I'm going to start with the chapter before this one. Or let's see. Yeah, the chapter before this one is still called Nox Quartia, and I did Nox Tertia yesterday. So comments on that, though.
Okay, what you just read, let me share a screen here a minute.
Okay.
Share screen, okay. Is that on?
Not yet.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute.
Wait.
It's not.
Hold on. I got to do this.
No, I'm not seeing it yet.
There you go.
Okay. Yep. There you go.
See it? Okay, this is a painting that's in the Red Book, and this also relates. It's also in The Secret of the Golden Flower, which is the. And then when he was in Liverpool, I think he read that in one of the comments. He visited Liverpool, was the heart of the city, and he saw it as a grid. And he realized that these little lights out here were people, and he was one of them. And what you just read says, don't try to be this, but realize that you're part of these contributors to this thing.
Right.
And I think this is, he really nails it when he does this image. But it's, and,
yeah, that's actually an image of the Liverpool dream.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and he repeated that before even the Red Book came out because it was in The Secret of the Golden Flower. So Let me see how I can get off that.
Yeah, long before the Red Book came out.
Yeah, so that's from what you just read. That's what I think is important. You can get your ego up and try to think you're that big thing, and you're not. So we're
Right
all
on.
contributors to the what's coming through, and we do
Yeah.
our each little part. And
And
that's
we
all we
each
can
have
do.
we each have our own truth.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. Um, and somehow all works by the collective unconscious. In other words, no matter where you are in the world, your culture has built up in such a way to, let's say, by logos, create a certain structure. Some of those structures are more rigid than others. Like the American structure is relatively fluid as compared to, let's say, the Egyptian structure, which is based on Islam, or the Iraqi structure based on Islam, or something like that, and or even Afghanistan, right, based on the Taliban. They have a very rigid structure, and so their society has basically been left behind, whereas our structure allows the truth of our citizenry basically to blossom forth. I mean, not perfectly, because there's always conflict, but the conflict is how we get to a better place. Basically, it's the clash that gets us to a better place.
Yeah, it's based on your temperament and how you're born, and if you can expand upon that and allow that to develop. Whereas if you're in a very rigid society, you may not be able to develop that. And I think that's one of the things about our country, at least, is that you're able to do that if you can get out of some of the habitual things from your family values if you do happen to be different and have a different temperament. So this is where I think the psychological types come in,
Yep.
is to realize and make sure that you're developing in accordance with what you were born to do.
And to try to obtain a balance, to understand a balance.
That
For
too,
example, in my case, because I'm so intuitive, for the longest time, I just was completely blind to what I didn't know. Okay. In other words, I can see 3 trees and assume there's a forest there. Okay. And, but, I didn't know there was a little hut in the forest. I didn't know there was a witch in the forest. I didn't know there was a troll in the forest, and all those things. But, if I apply my thinking to that a little, I can probably guess that there's a troll in the forest. But I won't necessarily know it because I don't know the details. And the details is probably my inferior function, I suppose, the S, because I'm so far out on the 99th percentile on intuitive. I'm simply blind to the details until somebody else brings them to me. Then I get it.
Yeah, and that's why we need teamwork
Right.
in terms of corporations, because we all can't see the same things. You add value, I add value, we all add value to this, and it's a group effort. It's not just you. And at the same time, you learn from each other about how they perceive things
Right.
differently from you. And then you can also learn to develop that. Part of the individuation process is learning to get into those quadrants once you've developed your your strength.
Yeah. Now, Nicholas says there's three sides of every truth: yours, mine, and the truth. And I would say, Nicholas, that this is a sort of a pointer toward the axiom of Maria and alchemy. But basically, think of all opposites. There's a thesis and antithesis, and then there's a synthesis. So maybe in the context of what you're talking about, Nicholas, we would say that I have a truth, you have a truth, and then somehow a symbol could present itself, which is the synthesis of our two truths, making this third truth. And then the axiom of Maria says that once you have that third truth, then you start over again, and now you have a new thesis. So, so the axiom of Maria from the 3rd century is 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 3, 3 becomes 4, which becomes 1 again. And so so there's the synthesis between you and me, and then that becomes another thing, which is a 1 in another dimension. So as we go forward, then we have our combined truth, which then somebody is going to take a logos style axe to that. That's the way it works.
Well, they're going to go into another cycle as you develop higher consciousness, and our whole
Right.
goal here is to
Get higher.
Develop higher consciousness, not necessarily get higher. But,
yes, you're right. Develop higher consciousness. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. There's a conversation going on between Penelope and Montana about astrology and Jungian psychology. And I would say that Dr. Jung was very much into astrology. And again, as I think Jerome would say, that we all would look at it a bit differently, but astrology is a divination technique like any other, like the tarot, like reading tea leaves, whatever, name your poison, whatever you want to use. And what they do is they, by synchronicity, cause connections in your psyche that when they're expressed by the reader, and Penelope is a past master reader in astrology, when she will say something, and by synchronicity, then it connects to your life. And so what happens, though, over thousands of years are things like the Chinese zodiac, where the Chinese would say, well, okay, this is a dog year, and dog year people are faithful. I happen to be a dog year people, so that's one of the things that I know about it. And so what would happen in the family is the child's born, and everybody would say to that child, well, you're a dog year person, so you have to be very like a dog. And you're a snake person, so you might have to be beautiful like a snake. I mean, snake people are beautiful, apparently. My wife is a snake person, so she assures me that that's true. And if you do that in a population of 1 billion people, or going up towards 1 billion people over a couple of thousand years, gradually it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, which is what then emerges from something like the tarot or astrology, which and any kind of astrology, in that people say that this means this, and then it does. It becomes that meaning. And then we apply it, and it becomes more true and more true and more true over time. And so then, you know, in medieval times, a woman would do a tarot reading, and it would be very true, and it would spook the leader, so he'd have her hung as a witch because she could read his mind, and he couldn't let her go on living because she would give up his secrets, so to speak. But the point is that the reader doesn't necessarily know what you're hiding. I hope that's right, Penelope. You can. I'm going to say it's right as a tarot reader, but I'm not going to absolutely insist on the truth of it from a astrology point of view, since I'm not an astrologer.
Yeah, I read the other day that the astrology it's an ancient thing, and it was developed because we were projecting our unconscious onto the stars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
sure.
it's our operation of the unconscious that they've discovered. And they mapped it out into psychology, into astrology. And then the same thing happened to the alchemist.
Sure.
Their experiments, the unconscious that's what they discovered, and that was their secret. They found out how the unconscious works.
Right. And then also they become self-fulfilling prophecies, though.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's reality.
Yeah, because once you say to a kid, I mean, Mandala says she's a rat ear person and she hates rats, but you know, rats are very good because they clean up the dregs from your table, and maybe they prevent certain kind of insect from getting in. So as long as they don't have fleas, which carry bubonic plague, rats can be good in some circumstances. And you know, I'm sure if I read the year of the rat in Chinese astrology, there would be certain good aspects about the rat. And its thriftiness and that sort of thing. And of course, in the famous Indian image of Ganesha, the one with the chubby man who has the head of an elephant, right? That's Ganesha, the most loved Indian god. And Ganesha has at his feet a rat, because Ganesha represents the round of life, and so he's, in fact, I might even have a Ganesha here. If I used to collect these things. The question is, do I have one at hand? I do. So my Ganesha does not seem to have the rat, but the Ganesha is supposed to have a rat. So there's Ganesha. And so Ganesha has his trunk in a bowl of something sweet like honey. And in one hand, he's got the implements of work on this side, on the right side. And he's dancing through the history of the world. He's happy. And out of his bowl of honey or grain, whatever it is, he's dropping grain down on the floor, and then the rat eats that. And so that represents the round of life. And so Ganesha is a very popular image in India, and because I've been to India 44 times, I've picked up a few Ganeshas over my time. But anyway, And Grenade says the ancients knew, right,
I
and
don't know if I can
Jung knew what the ancients knew. And
It's hard to see. I'm
oh, you
trying to
have a
show.
Ganesha too?
Yeah, I was trying to show my Ganesha, but it's kind of. But he's reclining on a couch.
Yeah, but
Is there a rat there? Has he got
is
a
there a
rat?
rat? Is there a rat?
No rat. He's got something in his hand though.
Yeah, well, he would have something in his hand
Yeah,
because
a ball or something.
yeah, he should have his trunk in a bowl, and
He's got a. I think that's a ball. I don't have very good lighting here. But
right. Interesting.
yeah.
That's a good Ganesha.
But he's also known for destroying people's preconceived notions about things. So he's pretty. He can really attack and he can destroy those assumptions that you might have made about yourself. So
Yep.
he's got several attributes there.
Right. I mean, after all, he is an elephant. So if his foot comes down on you, you're in serious trouble in his stance. Oh, and he has one broken tusk. So he has one tusk that's good and one that's broken.
Yeah.
And, you know, that represents the experience of life.
Yeah. I got one. That one's good and that one's broken right there.
Mm-hmm. So.
Yep. Oh, so much for today. We never know where these conversations go.
Yeah. Okay. So
I'll just add one more thing. Talking about animals, for the first time ever, I watched the delightful movie Groundhog Day, which is from 1993.
Right.
And I was saying to my family this morning, I said, we really got to stop and talk about that movie. What is it telling us? And it really relates to the passage that you just read about, let's just focus on creating a little garden around ourselves. And that's what that Groundhog Day movie's about. Have you seen it, Skip? Do you remember it?
Yeah. Yeah, I have seen it.
And Jerome, Nancy, have you watched it? So
yeah.
I now realize, as I said, I just watched it for the first time last night. Throughout the movie, for the first 2/3, he's trying to contend with how every day starts off the same at 6 a.m, and he has to relive this day every day for this longest time. And initially, he's really thinking about his happiness, and he's actually manipulating people, commodifying them in a way to serve him. And then at some point, I don't know, something dawns on him, because he's thinking, I'm never getting out of this. He's even trying to kill himself. And at some point he decides that, he's going to create a garden, as in the image there, a little garden around himself. And instead of thinking of his happiness, he starts being meaningful to others and giving to others. And he goes and he learns to play the piano. He cultures himself with art and generates talents. And then, giving to people and becoming a real, flower in the community, this little tiny town of Puxatawny.
Mm-hmm.
And then once he's done that, when he shifted from thinking about himself and his happiness to one of being, making meaningful life for himself and others, then he wakes up out of it. I thought it's a beautiful movie.
Right. Okay. I think that there's a few other things that we should just address here that Nancy has in her outline, and I'm just going to extemporaneously address them. First is Elijah and Salome. And so if you look in the playlist on this YouTube channel, under the Red Book, you'll find Mysterium Encounter. And so the Mysterium Encounter is covered both in an appendix to the Red Book and in the Red Book itself. And so the first sort of wise old man that comes to Jung is Elijah, who identifies himself as Elijah. And he has a blind woman with him who is Salome. And as Nancy correctly points out, she represents eroticism and instincts. She represents blind instincts, basically, whereas the wise old man represents, lots of experience leading to wisdom, right? And so that's one thing. And so you can find more information about that in this reading that I did called Mysterium Encounter. And then there's a reference to Philemon. Now, Philemon is basically becomes Jung's guru, and it's a part of himself that can bring forth wisdom out of his psyche. And just a couple of things about Philemon. Philemon also appears in Goethe's Faust, and Philemon's wife was Bacchus. And in Faust, Faust wants a certain area cleared so that he can do real estate development. And so the devil, Mephistopheles, comes in and just kills Philemon and Bacchus. But in the Greek tale, Philemon and Bacchus are humble people that live in a hut, and they welcome in the gods, Zeus and Hermes, I think. I don't remember for sure. It's definitely Zeus, but one other god. And they welcome the gods, but the gods are in mufti. They're disguised, so they don't recognize that they are gods at that moment. And so basically they follow the rule of we're going to kill the fatted calf for our guests, whoever they are. And so Philemon and Bacchus are preparing a dinner, but when they go to kill the goose, the god says, "Oh, you don't have to kill the goose for us." And he lets them keep the goose. But anyway, because they welcome and receive the gods, when they die, they have basically a temple in heaven and immortality, which they definitely do, because we're still talking about them, I don't know, 2,500 years later or something like that. And so Philemon was definitely a major figure in Dr. Jung's lifetime. And when he built his house in 1909, he had inscribed over the door in Latin, "Invited or not, the God will be present." And if you have any religious sensibility or not at all, you'll understand what that means. And then he talks about the anima, but I'm going to leave that because we talk about the anima a lot. And so I don't think we need to really go into that in great detail. One of the things that comes up on page 188 of Memories, Dreams, Reflections, which Nancy correctly points out, is that Jung had to receive from the Eros, from the chaos, which Montana was referring to. He has to receive the psychic energy and so on, but explaining what it was became a life's work. And so the psychic energy was generated during this Red Book period, and then Dr. Jung had to spend his whole life putting logos around it. He took the Eros and he had to explain it. And so he says at the beginning of the Red Book, just for everybody's information, the years of which I have spoken to you, when I pursued the inner images, were the most important time of my life. Everything else is to be derived from this. It began at that time, and the later details hardly matter anymore. My entire life consisted in elaborating what had burst forth from the unconscious and flooded me like an enigmatic stream and threatened to break me. That was the stuff and material for more than only one life. Everything later was merely the outer classification, the scientific elaboration, and the integration into life. But the numinous beginning, which contained everything, was then. And he wrote that little comment in 1957. And then there's an epilogue that was written in 1959, which is sort of poignant in a way. And funnily, if we think back on our discussion of Ulysses in our advanced class a couple weeks back, he ends this epilogue in the middle of a sentence. So we don't know what he was drawn off to. He lived another two years after. He wasn't dying at this point. So I worked on this book for 16 years. My acquaintance with alchemy in 1930 took me away from it. The beginning of the end came in 1928 when Wilhelm sent me the text of The Golden Flower, an alchemical treatise from China, by the way. There, the contents of this book found their way into actuality, and I could no longer continue working on it. To the superficial observer, it will appear like madness. It would have also developed into one had I not been able to absorb the overpowering force of the original experiences. With the help of alchemy, I could finally arrange them into a whole. I always knew that these experiences contained something precious, and therefore I knew of nothing better than to write them down in a precious, that is to say, costly book, and to paint the images that emerged through reliving it all, as well as I could. I knew how frightfully inadequate this undertaking was, but despite much work and many distractions, I remained true to it, even if another possibility never. And then that's the end. Okay, so, and let's see what else we have here. So Montana says, well, I think that astrology is a projection of unconscious contents. Beyond that fact, I do not know what to think about it. Well, yes, it is. And Penelope has it in a slightly different way, but also true. Not so much projection, but a looking at the symbols, meaning, archetypes, and how we are feeling in a real time. It is not predictive. And Montana comments, I have a few Hindu friends and their little statues fascinate the hell out of me, although they are bizarre as hell to me. Well, you know, if you're raised as a Hindu, you understand what these images mean. And I think that one of the most important aspects that we have to remember about Dr. Jung's work is that he realized that the way the psyche works is in images, okay? It's not by statistics, it's in images. And our psyche developed millions of years before there were even human beings, okay? When we were still swinging in the trees, images were being presented in the psyches of our ancestors who were great apes, and before them in other beings going back to single-celled organisms. And so the psyche, as long as there's been any sort of awareness and consciousness, has been presenting images. And our psyche didn't learn to read and write. It learned how to present images to us. And so it's our job to figure out what those images are telling us. And I think that if there's one thing you can take away from any of my sessions is that your psyche is talking to you 7 by 24 by 365. It's telling your cells to reproduce. It's telling your heart to beat. It's telling your lungs to get fresh air 12 times a minute. You never have to think about those things, and that's because your psyche is doing it for you on automatic. But when it is giving you a vision or a dream, that is also purposeful. It is taking some thesis and some antithesis in your psyche, something that's maybe crashing together, and it's presenting you a symbol of the answer. You could think of it that way. And so, you know, so it's worth it to get to understand the way these things work, but you can't get them from a dream book, okay? Because dream books can't predict what your image means in you, okay? Anyway, so I talked about the Golden Castle when Dr. Jung started The Secret of the Golden Flower, but let's talk a little bit about the Liverpool dream for a moment. And it's interesting to note that there's a statue in Liverpool, England. There is a statue of Dr. Jung, and Dr. Jung never went to Liverpool, but he had this dream, and this dream was his aha moment about the self. And he dreamed that he was living in the city, like Jerome was showing us at the beginning here. And it was laid out in eights, and there was a Swiss section, and so there was a Swiss living there, and he didn't quite understand why he was living there, but there was a rainy, dark night in his dream, and then he came down into the center of the city, and he saw, bathed in light, this beautiful magnolia tree, which represented the center of the self. And he then got it, and then he understood why the other Swiss in the dream wanted to live there near the self, because he could communicate and have direct communications with his personal self. And so anyway, I should shut up and give you all an opportunity to speak.
Well,
Nancy?
the liver is the symbol of, it's the only organ that's regenerative. In other words, in the
Yeah.
human body, it will regenerate itself. So it's the only
Yeah.
one. And so that he thought of that too. And then he also remember when he ate the liver of the girl in the dream.
Yeah.
And he's looking at that as life, and then Liverpool being the center of life. You know,
Yeah.
it's like,
Well, I wish I
there's
had
a,
known about the regenerative aspect of the liver, because my brother had 3 liver transplants in 1988 and finally died. But it
Yeah.
was before it was realized that you could do partial liver transplants.
and then it regenerates. Yeah.
Yeah, and it regenerates. So probably I would have given a part of my liver to my brother and saved his life if I had known that
Yeah.
back then.
Well, there's one example where logos came through. So,
Well, yeah, I mean, logos came through. Dr. Thomas Starzl figured out that he could transplant livers by testing it on pigs, but he never got to the regenerative piece of it, as far as I know, because the regenerative or the partial liver transplant was developed in King Faisal Hospital in Saudi Arabia, I happen to know.
yeah. Good.
And so Montana says archetypes are evolutionary tales in which moral conundrums were put forward and solved through the synthesis, antithesis of consciousness and the unconscious in an Uroboric entanglement, question mark. Well, actually that's myths that you're talking about there, Montana. Archetypes, you could think more of as dry riverbeds that you put your psychic energy through, like water. And when you put your psychic energy through it, then it is constellated. And once it starts, it plays to the end. And so, the one that's most common that we all can relate to is mother. A young woman may have a certain idea of what motherhood might be like before she becomes a mother. But when she's a mother, she's a mother. And not only that, she's a mother for life. Right, Nancy? Is that fair enough?
Yes, your kids are never too old to still be your kids.
So anyway, these archetypes are patterns that we flow our lives into. So young men typically need to become a warrior. They need to fight for something. It doesn't mean they have to join the Marines, but it means they have to prove that they're men by doing something. And so for the Maasai, they used to, or they still do, I think, take their 14-year-old boys out in front of the tribe with a spear and wait until the lion attacked. And the boy has to hold his ground and kill the lion. And then he's experienced. You can talk about killing a lion all you want, but after you've done it once with a spear, then you can be a Maasai warrior. It's like that. Although it's not something I would particularly relish trying, no matter when I tried it, even when I was older than 14. But there are many archetypes, and I do want to mention again, for the purposes of this video, I want to mention again that there is availability for the public to participate in this year's Eros conference. And that is taking place in Ascona, Switzerland on the 23rd to 26th of, where is it? What did I do with it? 23rd to 26th of April 2020 in Ascona, Switzerland. Somewhere here, I'm going to, let's see. Oh, there we are. Okay, I want to share it with you. All right, so I'm going to share the brochure about it. So if you're interested in this, this is, there have been 3 volumes of this book, Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions. And so this conference, if you want to go to it, you write to info@aranosfoundation.org so that you can attend. And this is the details of it. I'm just going to scroll through each page so that you can come back and look at each page. But it's going to be quite an impressive program. And the program does include Murray Stein, who's a leading Jungian analyst of this century, and Dr. Thomas Arst, who's the executive director of the Durkheim Center in Germany, and who did this, the first essay in the series. And it also includes Stephen Eisenstadt, who is a founder of Pacifica Graduate Institute, and Joseph Cambrai, who is the current president. And so you can find out all about these guys on these pages. I'm just going to scroll through them. And yes, there are some women attending, but the Eros event, Eros is written up in a book called Eros, an Alternative History, an alternative intellectual history of the 20th century. And I'll pull that up too. Let me just for a moment pull that up, because that is a book. Okay, here's the Wikipedia, or I'm sorry, the Amazon page for this book. And one of the significant things about this conference, which is unlike any other, as near as I can tell, is that there are many, let's see, am I not showing it? I guess I'm not showing it yet. Mess that up. Just a minute. I have too many things on my screen. That's obvious. Okay. Try again. Where does she get it? Okay, so many of the people, as I've been reading this book, it's a fascinating book, and I recommend it on Kindle. I found the print a little bit small in the hard copy, but on Kindle you can extend the print a little bit and read it better. I bought it both ways. It's a great book, and but one of the significant things about it is that many of the thought leaders of the 20th century, including and especially Dr. Jung, participated in this conference every year, and it's been going for about 90 years, with the only exception being 1989. Go figure, why didn't they do it in 1989? But in any case, it's quite a impressive book about the development of this thought, and it explains that many of these people who attended this conference found that it changed their lives in many ways, and not the least of which was getting to know other participants in the conference. And so if you can attend it, I urge you to do that. I will be there, and if you're going to go, let me know. I would appreciate it so that I can connect with you when we're there. But I think more important for anybody else is that it's an opportunity to network with this very powerful group of Jungian analysts and Jungian writers. So it's going to be a very interesting conference. And so it is, they have opened registrations to the public at this point, and there is space available. So I urge you to attend if you can manage to cover it. My budget for the trip is about $2,500 is how much I'm planning to spend, counting my airfare, the conference itself, and my hotel bill for 5 days. So just in case anybody wants to do that. Okay.
Nicholas Chan says he's written in and gotten a response, but I don't.
So Nicholas, have they said you're in or not? Because if you're in, they would have sent you a. They would have seemed favorable. Okay, good. So so one of the things that they will send you as soon as you register for the conference is they'll send you hotel information, hotel details, so that you can get booked, because obviously there'll be a lot of people there. So you want to get into one of the hotels. And anyway, very interesting book, just fascinating. All the things, all the people that are participating, all their interactions over 50 years, and who was participating. And if you can get to know the contemporary people that are like that, it's going to be a very powerful opportunity for your lives, I think. Okay, so Nicholas says, yes, he's in. Well, great. Look me up when you get there and let me know how you're going. I'm leaving on the 21st of April via Milan, and I'm going to rent a car up to Ascona so we can communicate privately on travel. Because if we could connect in Milan, then you can ride with me to Ascona. Let's see if that can work. So anyway, anything else? So next week, we should look at this. There's the work. Oh my goodness. He's going to make us go through all the work. Okay. All right. So let's talk about the work and the tower next week, and maybe travels. You want to talk about that too? What do you think is possible, Jerome?
Is the work on building the castle? Or?
No, the work is on all of his writing over the years.
Oh, okay.
And
I hadn't found it. Oh, the tower is different. That's not.
Yeah, the tower is about building Bollingen, but
yeah, the work is something. Yeah, that we did.
Yeah,
So
but
yeah.
All right, let's try to do those 3 chapters next week. It's not too much, and as I said, there is a Audible version of this book, which is very good. So I've been listening, I've listened to that Audible book probably 15 times. So the way I've been preparing for these classes is I'm listening to it on my Audible app on my iPhone at double time, which works quite fine because of And Jerome is holding up the book. This is the book we're reading, and it is available on audible.com. I haven't made an attempt to read it myself because it already has an excellent reading. And what got me into reading these books was nobody else was doing it. So I just decided somebody's got to do it. And so I think I'm about 10 readings away from the end, but they're very interesting readings about the gift and the gift of magic and the magician. The magician is that alone is about 60 or 70 pages. So it may take me 4 or 5 days to read about the magician, who happens to be Philemon, by the way. But anyway, okay. So Nicholas, just get in touch with me and let's talk about sharing a ride up to Ascona. That might be helpful to you. I'm told Thomas R. says that there is an airport in Ascona, but you would have to connect from someplace in Europe, and I was not able to get any of the travel sites to give me a ticket to Ascona. So I just picked Milan because it's only 72 miles from Ascona, whereas Zurich is 120, I think, 112 or something.
And I wanted to thank Nancy for doing the outline. That was great.
Yes, thank you very much, Nancy. That was a big help. That was a huge help. And I will put that in the Dropbox. So it will be under handouts for this date. 021720 will be the handout, the way it's.
There's one thing we haven't talked about that I'd just like to mention before we go.
Sure.
And that's where Jung had a dream, and there was a child in his dream, and he knew he needed to get the energy of that figure into his own life for creativity. Yes. And he started playing games, and the major game was building a little town out of small stones.
Right.
And it was a way to get to that energy and bring it into his present life. So I think it is important that we work with these images. And I was impressed with how long this went on for him.
Oh, yes.
It wasn't just a day or 2 or 3, but it was on and on and on and on. But it changed him and healed him as he did it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, there's a reading on the website now about the divine child. I think it's either Nox Tertia or I think it's Nox Tertia. And there's a picture of Thanos in that reading, who is the divine child. And the point is that there's a part of us that always wants to be a child. And, you know, this was a big part of what Jung was talking about. Let me see if I can find I'll find the picture of Thanos here if I can. Just take me a minute. Oh, there it is. There he is. Okay, so here's Thanos. And so if you see that in a thumbnail, that's the reading about the divine child from the Red Book. And, you know, the point is that we all need creativity in our lives. And so you need to find a way to be creative about something. And so he learned this by, as Nancy says, building little towns along the lakeshore of Lake Zurich. And he did it for a long time, and he actually did it from childhood on. And you know, later that turned into, I mean, he really did the same thing later on when he built Bollingen, and he literally built that house with his bare hands. as the stonemason. He was the stonemason. And that process of creativity, which went on throughout his life, and which is heavily discussed in this other book, The Art of C.G. Jung, kept his psyche going. So he was constantly in touch with his unconscious. And it doesn't mean that if you build a house with your bare hands, you're going to become a great psychiatrist. It means that if you build a house with your own hands, you're going to be in touch with your self, your unconscious, and that will guide you in your life.
So it's kind of like maintaining your balance, in other words.
Right.
From what he was at work, he was Apollo, and then, he was Dionysus. And when he was playing, he used to go down to a creek and play in the sand with sticks and draw things.
Yeah.
Just as a matter of course. So.
Yeah, and Debbie Bowman Stevens says she enjoyed that part of the chapter too, Nancy. And I guess I can ask Debbie how she's doing. She had some surgery a couple weeks back, and I'm hoping that she's recovering so that she can come to our next Sammy's event. Montana says he even played in the sand as an old man in his 70s. He would sit at the edge of the lake and cut little grooves into the sand, watch the water rush into it, right? And so, as I say, he was creative all his life. And as I've often said, every day I make an omelet for my wife as a way to connect up my creativity of my psyche to get it working in the morning. So the first thing in the morning, I make an omelet for my wife, and that's a creative act. I consider that a creative act that gets me going in the morning. And Nicholas says, and he had one asymmetric stone that was wrongly delivered, but he took as right. The stone in the backyard with the Greek inscriptions is very interesting. Yes, it is. Nicholas says the Orphic omelet, absolutely. And Debbie says, I am doing well, thank you. Hope to join you again soon. Okay, terrific. Good. It will be good to see you. March 2nd, we're going to do collage with Sandy Pelletier. So that'll be fun. So next week we have one more session though, before the monthly Sammy session. And so we'll be doing up through the tower, and what was the next one? Travels. Okay. So his travels are quite interesting because he spared no expense to go out into the wilds of Kenya, and it made a difference. It did. There's some very good stories in there. So, but anyway, we have to move along because it's 10:22. So we've made a very long video.
We always do.
Yeah, so thank you, Nancy, for joining tonight.
Yeah, thanks.
You're welcome.
Nice to see you tonight.
Yeah.
And Debbie says she's walking. Well, that's terrific because Debbie got a new knee. And
I want you to know, Debbie, I've been praying for you.
Oh, that's good.
You're great.
Yeah, boy. And having had a knee replacement myself, I know what she's going through, and so maybe not like she's going through, because this is actually her second knee replacement on the same knee, so I haven't done that yet. It's an experience I don't really want to have. Oh, I did want to mention though that here there's a picture. This picture actually happened to me when I was having my knee replaced. Here's the picture. When I was having my knee replaced and I was coming out of my anesthetic, I had a vision of an extremely tight ball of spirits hovering near me. It was dark. It was like black, but I had like this many small faces on that ball. And it was like they were bodies writhing together. That was my visionary experience coming out of anesthesia for my knee replacement. For what it's worth. Okay.
I'm not going to go there, but if
Oh,
you read some of the hippie experiences, they describe the same thing with having these little characters around coming out. So it might have been the drugs.
Well, I'm sure it was the drugs, and,
Yeah.
but or the kabiri, as Jung calls it, the kabiri, right? He says, "Wow, you've touched the other side." Yeah, I think I have. And if you, I did my memoriam to Carolyn McCool the other day, and Nancy kindly made a lovely comment about it. But Ray Green wrote to me this morning and said, well, we didn't know because for us, she's not gone. And that's quite true. And so if you haven't listened to my reminiscence about Carolyn McCool, you might find that interesting. Just mention that at the end here. So anyway, peace. Take care. See you next week, or see you Wednesday. See you Wednesday.
All right.
And I'll be doing
Good
the
night.
I Ching on Wednesday. What do you want me to? What fortune do you want me to read?
Whatever comes up.
Boy.
Are you going to use the sticks, the arrow sticks, or?
No, I'm going to use coins because I have coins.
Okay.
So I don't have Eros sticks, but I have coins. And how about that image of the black beast going around the Daytona 500 yesterday? Wow, that's an awesome image. Really frightening. Anyway, peace. Take care.